Welcome back 3D design students. In this video we're going to use mesh to scatter our grass around the meadow. So let's get started. So I've still got my couple of pieces of grass in here. You can have as many as you'd like, but you can only scatter one per mesh network. So you might want to do two to get a more random appearance, but I'm just going to use this one just to demonstrate the technique. So I'm going to grab this one. And then we need to change to the FX menu set and find mesh. We also have a mesh shelf here, but I want you to use the mesh menu here because we need to open up the mesh network options so we can reset the settings a couple of times before we do our thing. So go ahead and reset the settings and click apply and close. And we now have a mesh network, and notice our piece of grass that we had selected is now gone. So to review that process, select the grass you want to scatter, go to the mesh menu item, bring up the mesh options, reset the settings, and click apply and close, and your mesh object will disappear. It hasn't really disappeared. Where it is in the center of your scene, and it's scattered in a linear way on the center of the grid. If we select the mesh object in our outliner and come over to the attributes editor, you can see we have all sorts of options here. This one is the mesh distribute node, and you can see we have 10 nodes, and the distance between them can be changed, and you can see you can click and drag that, and that changes the distance between them. Right now the distribution type is linear. We want to change that to mesh, but you can see there are all sorts of other ways to distribute objects as well. We're going to change it to mesh. And when we do, it says, please connect to mesh. So what we're going to do is select our plane, but let's go ahead and rename it grass, or no, sorry, ground. And select the mesh network, and then where it says input mesh here, just click and drag that very quickly and drop it into that blank. And we are now connected to the ground plane. Now we only have 10 pieces of grass, so you can't really see them very well. But if we switch to wireframe, you can see them. Now before we do much more, we want to change these grass types from straight up copies to instances. So select the mesh object in your outliner, come up to mesh in the menu, select utilities, and find switch geometry type. And that now changes the objects from straight copies to instances. And that will be a lot easier on the computer's processor. Now if we wanted to change anything about our grass, the power of an instance is this. If you select your original object, which is simply hidden at this point, and make it visible by going to the channel box and then zoom in on it, watch what happens if I change this object. Watch what happens to all the other ones. That's because these grass objects are instances of the original. So if I change anything about the original, all the other ones will change. And that's what an instance is. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that thing again. And go back to the attributes editor and select mesh. And I'm going to scatter more instances. Let's make it 500. And you can clearly see we now have a lot more grass on our plane. We'll switch to shaded. And you can see our grass objects right here. You can see them. They kind of blend in. Let's select mesh again, and maybe let's make this more like 10,000. And then you will be able to clearly see these objects, especially if you go into wireframe. One of the reasons we really can't see these is because, remember, we're using Arnold materials and we don't have any Arnold lights, and we're not using the Arnold renderer yet at this point. So select your ground plane and come up to the Arnold, find the Arnold surface material, and let's go ahead and name this ground. And let's drag the roughness of the ground plane down to 0, so it's not going to be shiny. And then let's add a Arnold Sky Dome light to the scene. And then let's change to the Arnold renderer. And when we render, you can see the grass. Now, my grass is kind of blending into my scene here a little bit more than I would like. So I think in order to fix that, I'm going to select the ground plane and go to the ground material, and I'm going to go to the color node here and go to the place texture node and maybe tile this just a little more. And then I'll probably make my grass a little bigger. So I'm going to select that grass variant. So I wanted to show this to you because what happened here, and this looks kind of crazy, what happened here was I tried to scale up my original instance just to make them bigger, to make them stand out a little more, to make all the instances stand out a little more. And when I did, it just went crazy like this. So if that happens to you, what you need to do is undo until you get to the point where you have the object selected. And then you need to change the number of points down to something different. And switch to wireframe so you can see what's going on. You may have to turn off Arnold, and you can see that there they are. And then go back to your original number or something a little more. So you can see I have my distribution now. And if I go back to mesh and click render, it'll be back to normal. So I'm going to open up the Arnold render view now and see what that looks like in there. It never could seem to get quite rendered all the way in the viewport, so I switched to the Arnold render view, and you can see I have a very nice grass texture here. But what I think I'm going to do to make it stand out a little better is grab my ground plane and go to the ground material, and I'm going to open up that ground map again. I'm going to go to the file, find the color balance, and I'm going to knock the exposure down a little bit just to make the ground a little darker than the surrounding grass. We'll see what that looks like. That may give me some more contrast between the grass objects and the ground itself. And there you go. I think that looks pretty nice. So I think that looks really good. So what we're going to do is go ahead and save this scene as maybe landscape or something. And then when we come back, we're going to create a rock for our scene. And I'll see you then.